All right, guys. So we're gonna show the first combo here now for Leontina. We have 3 face-up damage in the damage zone, although typically you'd need only 2. But the more face-up damage you have, like the more flexibility, more of a cushion you have in terms of how far you can extend. And then the most important part is your soul. You want your soul to have most of the combo pieces, which is why this is like a more late game oriented combo, because by then you will have filled your soul with most of the combo pieces. So the way you set your ratios for the deck kind of determines how easy it will be to get these kinds of cards in our soul. But the main idea is to have at least 2 upright lines somewhere in rotation. So we have those 2. And then we have 1 Marichka, at least 1 Marichka. You can have 2. 2 is pretty good. And I'll show this combo with 2, but 1 is fine as well. But the most important part is that you need at least 1 Salvia, or 1 Salvia, I shouldn't say at least. And then you need at least 2 Zelma. This is kind of probably the most important part. This Zelma allows for the combos in the first place. The rest is not really anything like specific. Anna's, oh, okay, you need Anna. That one you definitely need. Megalorude you don't need, but if you do have him in the soul, then you should, if you don't have Megalorude in the soul, then you should leave one of your rearguard circles empty, and I'll talk about that when we get into the combo. But basically that allows us to just do the combo without having to call over too many of our cards. Okay, so that's our soul setup. So we're just gonna go right into the stride discarding Venus Lucia. And notice that we have 3 accel markers. 4 is sometimes what you'll have if you go first and you do Leontina on your second stride, but 3 is more than enough in terms of what you need to pull off the combo. Now, of course, because the premium is very fast format these days, if you go first, you might find yourself going into Dark Lord Princess into Hari more often than not on your first stride after you've done your first grade 3 turn already. But again, not a bad thing. It's just a consequence of how fast the format is now. And also, it's worth noting that Emil is something you want to slow down on late game, because your deck might get dangerously close to decking out if you're not careful. And you want to make sure you last long enough for Leontina to be a factor. So we're going to stride into Leontina. And because we're not running Cat 9 and high boots, we're not going to be able to build our board without a Dixie or a Salvia in hand. So do make sure you have at least one of those, or you have a Zelma. A Zelma also works as long as you can call something else out from your hand. But we have the Dixie, so we're good. But first thing we're going to do is call an upright line from our hand since we have one, and we're going to call that here, okay? The goal of what we're trying to do for this turn is to get at least 4 rearguards on the board before we use Leontina's ability, and then we attack with all of those before we use Leontina's ability. That way, we'll be able to call out 8 from Soul, or up to 8. In our case, the idea of calling out something like Upright Line from our hand or from our Soul beforehand is that at least it puts some pressure on our opponent before we actually get the guard restrict. We don't want them to just sit comfortably, right? So that's the goal of that. We'll call Dixie. We'll use the ability to put on the top of the deck, and we're going to call something from Soul. So, depending on how good your hand is for calling stuff to the board, you don't need to call like something like Salvia necessarily. In fact, calling something like Emil might be nice just because you get to filter your deck a little more perhaps, but remember, Emil doesn't stick to the board, so might not be desirable necessarily. But we'll do Salvia here so that I can just prove that you don't need the full 3 counterblasts for the turn. We'll call Salvia, and we can call it here. It doesn't really matter. And then we'll do, so Upright Line's going to get +3 for that. We're going to just count the stacks as intervals of 1, just so that, we don't lose, we don't have to have, like, multiple dice there. So yeah, okay, so we got 1 stack of Upright Line, and then Salvia to counterblast, call 2 more cards from Soul. Of course, those should be, one of those can be Upright Line, doesn't have to be, but definitely it doesn't hurt to have an Upright Line. And the other one we're going to do is going to be Zelma. And we're going to use the Upright Lines, so both of them are going to get +3. And then Zelma's going to put Salvia into the Soul, and we can call something else out. I like calling Lillian just to get that nice beat stick, but it's not 100% needed because our hand, you know, we have plenty of good things to be able to call from our hand as well. But anyway, I'll just go for Lillian. And last thing we want to do, since we already have the 4, you might want to call, maybe you want to call something here supposedly, but you know, it's not something you need to do. This Irina can be called to the accel circle if you just feel more comfortable doing that. Or you can just also call the Zelma here. It really doesn't matter. This Zelma is not going to be used for anything because it's going to go into the soul when Leontina attacks anyway. So we can just call the Lillian here and then save the card in our hand. So we got the upright lines. See, notice how the upright lines are not really stacked that much. If we had more damage, we're at 3 damage here. If you have more damage, then you'd probably extend a little more with these upright lines. But if you have 3 damage, then you don't really want to push too much because the Leontina is going to really be the one that's going to be pushing them for damage. Yeah, so, and I can show in the next combo, like if you have 4 accel markers and more damage, what that'll look like pre-Leontina attacking. Okay, so into battle. Of course, you swing with all of these first. This is going to be 17. This is going to be 20, I believe. 6, 15, yep, 20. And this one's going to be 24. So notice how the Lillian was actually more than these upright lines. If that's the case, then obviously you want to be calling the Lillians out, but we just don't have those Lillians. So no worries. And then finally we attack with Leontina. So Leontina costs a counterblast, so just keep that in mind. You don't want to get too ahead of yourself with your combos with that in mind. So we're going to discard Anna. You can discard anything, but we're just going to discard Anna. Then we put all of our rear guards into our soul. And for each card put into the soul, we choose 2 cards from our soul and call them to the rear guard circle, up to 2 cards. And if we call 4 or more with different grades, then that's when the guard restrict goes online. So here's what we want to do. We want to call Megalorude because we have it. If we don't have it, no worries. We just adjust it a little bit just to make sure we can still get that 4 grades. But we're going to basically do 0, 1, 2, 4. We're going to call Alut there. We're going to call Marichka here. We're going to call other Marichka here because we have that second Marichka. And then we're going to call Anna here. And we're going to call all of our upright lines to the accel circles. The reason for this is these main circles are going to be the ones that are shifting around. We want to have upright lines in a place where they don't get in the way of the back row cards. So that's why we want to put them on the accel markers. Okay, so first let's do the upright line stacks. Each upright line is going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stacks. So that's a total of 21,000 power. I've got, this is a 6 right here. Just keep that in mind, guys. It's not a 1. So, let's see. Each of these are going to get 7 stacks. I think that's all my dice. Oh, no, never mind. I got one more. Okay. Well, might need to switch to another pair of dice. But anyway, all of them get their powers. But remember that we finished Leontina first, technically. So because we called 0, 1, 2, and 4, we get the guard restrict online. Now, what if we don't have Megalorude? Well, this is one of your circles has got to be empty. So this is where you'd say, okay, I'm not going to call this one of these Marichkas. Instead, I'm just going to call a grade 3 like Dorian, just to make sure I still fulfill it. It's not ideal, right? But it's just what you have to do. It's how you have to adjust it. Not a huge deal. But ideally, you'd have Megalorude just to make sure that you can still fulfill it. And I'll go over the combo that's like a bit more common after this one. I just want to show what it's like when you have Megalorude and 3 accel markers. Okay, so we're all set up here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use Megalorude to put, pardon me, we're going to use Anna to put herself and Megalorude into the soul and countercharge. That's thanks to the ability of Anna. So that frees up these 2 spots right here. And then Megalorude's ability also triggered. It went into standby. It does not have to be on the rearguard circle in order for it to be resolved, but Ana does. So that's why you have to do that first. But of course, we don't want to do it just yet. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out as a distinction. We're going to use Marichka first. We're going to use Marichka's skill to call out Selvia to the same column. And before we forget, we're going to put the stack on each of these upright lines for that call. And one instance of Selvia is going to go into standby, okay? And then we still have the Megalorude in standby, so we're going to use that Megalorude to put Selvia into the soul. And Megalorude's not on the field anymore, so no plus 15 to it, but, you know, it's like that. And then we're going to use this other Marichka to call out Selvia to that column, because that was also in standby. So that's going to put another stack on all of these upright lines. And that's going to put another instance of Selvia in standby. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, we have a number of options. What we really want to do is make use of these last two counterblasts to make sure that we can storm the field as much as we can while stacking these upright lines. So absolutely what we want to do, we want to use one of those Selvias, and we want to go into Zelma. So we're going to go into Zelma number 1 right there. And we're going to do Zelma number 1 over this Marichka. So this is where Marichka is going to go away. But it's a necessary thing to happen. Zelma number 2 is going to go here. Okay. We're going to use this Zelma, or both Zelmas go in standby, and we're going to give all of our upright lines +2 on their stack, so that's +6 in total. And now we have some Zelmas to resolve. So the first thing we want to do, and I'm already seeing that this is probably going to be an issue, so let me call the Zelma here instead, and we're going to leave that Marichka there. Same thing overall, but slight difference, I suppose. This combo gets crazy for me as well, so that's why I need to try to master it myself. Don't forget we still have the Selvia in standby, but we don't want it on the field long term. So we're going to use this Zelma right here. Put this Zelma into, or we're going to use this Zelma specifically. This Zelma to put this Selvia into the soul. And we're going to call out Lillian. So that's another stack on all these upright lines. So we use this Zelma now. We're going to use this Zelma to put this Zelma into the soul. And you can call out whatever you've got left. So in this case, generally what you want to do is you want to call it something that you're willing to sacrifice because it's going to probably be called over. So we're going to call Irina. Don't forget that we still have another Selvia in standby, so that's why we're kind of doing this. So let me get these other dice. That's going to be another 1 stack to each of these upright lines. We're going to use Irina's ability. Check top 2. And look, they're both Dixies. Unfortunate, but it's not uncommon. So they're going to both go to the bottom of the deck. And don't keep in mind, for Irina's ability, you don't have to look at both. It says look at up to 2, so you can just look at 1 and be like, okay, maybe I should stop here, because it does say look at up to top 2. So, you know, I mean, of course, we've already seen the other one, but let's say, okay, we've seen this one Dixie. We're like, okay, we're pretty confident that there might be another trigger somewhere there, so we don't want to interfere with that. We're just going to leave that one alone and stop right there. But that is available for Irina because it does say look at up to 2. All right, so we've resolved the Irina. Now what we want to do is we want to resolve the other Selvia. Counterblast and call 2. So the 2 we're going to call here, we're going to call over this Irina. Did I do this right? Let's see. I did not do this right, but it's fine. We're going to call over this Marichka. And we're going to call, let's see. We can call anything here. Let's call this Venus Lucia. It's going to go away as well, unfortunately. Or this one's not going to go away. This is going to remain. But we're going to call this Venus Lucia. It really doesn't matter. The important part is that's going to be, the card you call over is going to be retired. So we called 2. All these upright lines get an extra 2 stacks, and now we have 1 Zelma remaining to resolve. We put this Zelma into the soul, and here's where we call Dorian. That way we also get the card draw at the end of the turn. Alright, and that completes all the auto abilities in standby, and that completes our usage of our counterblast. So now let's count how much power our upright lines got to during the process. So this represents 6, so this is total 12 plus 3 is 15. So all of our upright lines got 15 stacks, which means we multiply that by 3 because it's 3,000 per stack, which is 45,000. So all of our upright lines got to 45 plus 9 is 54 plus 5 is 59. All of our upright lines are 59, and they're going to have a 2 more guard restrict associated with them as well. So pretty lethal if you ask me. Our Leontina was 27, so let's go ahead and do the drive check. The first was a crit, so of course that would be a crit to one of these upright lines. You decide to apply the power anywhere. Second is Venus Luquier. Third is Irina. So it'd be interesting to see what the drive check would have been without that Irina. But regardless, we still have these attacks here. We got 19. We've got this one, depending on what you left in the soul, which we did leave enough names in the soul for it to be extra 10k. So that's going to be 26. And then each of these is going to be 59. One of them is going to be, of course, 64 with the crit, depending on where you put it on. But that's what it looks like when you've got 3 counterblast as well as 3 accel markers. Now, obviously, as I said before, if you have more counterblast, then you can put up kind of more of a fight before the Leontina actually attacks. That way, you're not just saying, "Oh, okay, let me just call down these cards just to get Leontina enough monsters or enough units to work with." But let's go ahead and show next the combo involving a couple more counterblasts. Maybe it's later in the game, and maybe you have another accel marker as well.